At Antarctica, New Zealand, we are kitted out in the latest polar clothing and then fly south on a C-130 Hercules aircraft. After flying over the Southern Ocean, we get our first glimpse of Antarctica, with glaciers draining from the ice sheet down through the mountains to the Ross Sea, and we finally land on the ice shelf runway at McMurdo. A short vehicle ride and we arrive at the familiar green buildings of Scott Base. Here on Observation Hill, I'm dressed in my modern cold weather gear. It's only about -8 degrees, and because there's not a lot of wind today, it's actually quite pleasant conditions. I can have my hat off for at least a few minutes. From here we can see many of the geographic features that we've talked about earlier. Behind me, disappearing into the clouds, is the Royal Society Range, and they get up to over 4,000 metres high. The Royal Societies are part of the Transantarctic Mountains, which stretch for over 3,000 kilometres, effectively dividing East Antarctica from West Antarctica. The ice sheet behind those mountains, the East Antarctic ice sheet, is the largest ice sheet in the world, represents 88% of the ice down here. It's over 4.5 kilometres thick. Glaciers drain down through the mountains and into McMurdo Sound, which you can see to my left. So this is open water during the summer, but at the moment it's covered with annual sea ice. So it's about 2 metres thick, it's very strong, you can land planes on it, you can drive on it, but it will be gone within just a few weeks. Over on my right, there's a couple of volcanoes, Mount Discovery, Mount Morning and Black Island, and they're much younger features. They've only been there for less than the last 20 million years or so. Extending out over this way is the Ross Ice Shelf, the biggest ice shelf in the world. It's over 500,000 square kilometres. It's bigger than France. This ice shelf is fed by glaciers draining from the East Antarctic ice sheet, but also from the West Antarctic ice sheet, which is way in the distance and beyond what we can see here. The history of geological research began in the McMurdo Sound region, here where New Zealand's Scott Base and the American McMurdo Station are located. Captain James Clark Ross was the first explorer to venture into the Ross Sea with his ships Erebus and Terror in January 1841. The expedition charted some of the coastline. They named Mount Erebus and Terror after their ships. They dredged the seafloor, but they didn't make landfall here. It wasn't until 1901 that the area was visited again by the British National Antarctic Expedition, better known as the Discovery Expedition, led by Robert Falcon Scott. And they established their base here at Discovery Hut on Hut Point. The expedition included the first geological observations of Ross Island, White Island and a crossover onto the continent when they ascended the Farrar Glacier, discovered the Polar Plateau and the Taylor Valley. The impressively named Hartley Travis Farrar was a young geologist on this expedition, and he described the sedimentary rocks that he saw as they went up the Farrar Glacier, and he named them the Beacon Sandstone Formation. He collected plant fossils, including imprints of the now famous Glossopteris tree, one of the key fossils linking Antarctica to Gondwana, and clearly telling a story of past warm climates that had existed here. Farrar published his map and his accounts of the geology in 1907. Not long after the Discovery Expedition, the British Antarctic Expedition, or Nimrod Expedition, led by Ernest Shackleton, visited this area from 1907 to 1909, establishing a base at Cape Royds. The expedition included several geologists, namely Edgeworth Davis, Cotton, Priestley, Brocklehurst and Mawson, names that are very familiar to us today because glaciers and landforms are named after them. The expedition made several important scientific discoveries. They were the first to ascend Erebus volcano, they mapped a lot of the coastline here, and they were the first to get to the South Magnetic Pole. Captain Scott's second expedition, the Terra Nova expedition, came here in 1910 to 1913, building a hut at Cape Evans. The expedition included geologists Priestley, Griffith Taylor, Debenham and Wright, who mapped a lot of the coastline and the mountains, describing the sedimentary rocks in more detail and collecting fish fossils, fossil leaves and coal layers. So they gave a more in-depth account of the geology, recognising the similarity of the geology here to southern Australia. I'm sitting in the TAE hut, one of the original Scott Base buildings that was established during the Transantarctic Expedition. And it's a great place to have a think about the geological work that was done at the time. From this base, there were New Zealand sledging and man-hauling parties. In particular, Bernie Gunn and Gunyan Warren completed an epic 1,500 kilometre sledging journey through the Transantarctic Mountains, describing the geology as they went. Victoria University also started its expeditions at this time. In 1957, the very unlikely story of Peter Webb and Barry McKelvey, two geology students at Victoria, came down to Antarctica and were the first people to explore some of the dry valleys. That early work from Victoria University is actually still here in the TAE hut, and all of the papers from the late 50s and early 60s are in here. Makes a fantastic reading. After the IGY, there were many more expeditions from the United States and New Zealand parties to this region. So during the 1960s, 70s and 80s, there were increasingly detailed studies of the outcropping geology. But there was also a shift in focus to trying to understand the antiquity of the dry valleys and also the climate ice sheet history here, leading to drilling projects during the 1970s and still continuing today in the offshore basins.